Hi everyone, my name is Mala and I'm a Senior Advisor at the World Health Organization and the former Director of Tech for Social Good at GitHub. Now, it's been a while since I've come out with a new video because I've been working on other projects, one of which I'll talk about in a few minutes. Now, I want to thank everyone who reached out on LinkedIn when I asked my network for suggestions about what to cover in this video. While I do plan to discuss those ideas in the future, I've gotten so many questions about AI for social good recently that I felt like I needed another video exploring the topic from a different angle. In my last video, I spoke about broad opportunity areas of AI in the social sector. In this video, I'm going to talk about three major tensions in applying AI and ML solutions for social good. Like my last video, this will mostly focus on broad, almost existential considerations that companies in the tech industry, governments, social sector organizations, and even individuals should consider. As always, a few disclaimers. First, the opinions expressed in this video are strictly my personal views, not that of WHO or the broader United Nations, GitHub, Microsoft, or any of my past or future employers. Second, this video is strictly for informational purposes. I'll mention other resources throughout that go into much more depth on some of these topics. Third, in no way should this video be misconstrued as product investment or programmatic advice. Fourth, AI and ML developments are fast, constantly moving targets, and therefore some of what I say may be outdated by the time you view this. Finally, fifth, these are just three of many tensions in AI for social good. Of course, there are plenty more. The three major tensions I'll cover in this video are: one, incorporating social good frameworks into new AI platforms and AI governance; two, the inner exclusion of marginalized or minority populations in large language models; and three, the interdisciplinary nature of human development. In 2019, I gave a talk at GitHub Universe that in part covered what I think is one of the seminal challenges in tech for social good, and that's most major tech products and platforms do not incorporate social sector frameworks in any capacity, not in functionality or as taxonomies or in governance. GitHub is obviously a platform I know well, so I'll use it to explain one aspect of this idea. Now, this is the GitHub organization or GitHub account for something that's highly relevant to AI, TensorFlow, which is an open source machine learning platform built by Google. As a hard-coded feature, meaning a default feature that is available to all users and not easily modifiable, GitHub automatically detects and displays code in an organization or repository by programming languages. Now, if I click here on Python, the top used language of TensorFlow, I can see all repos in this organization that are primarily written in Python. And at the repo level, I can click to see code files, issues, pull requests, and packages that are in or related to Python. Because so much information about programming languages is directly interconnected on GitHub as a platform, it's relatively easy to organize communities or find trending projects or topics related to Python at all levels of the platform. For a code hosting platform, that makes sense. It makes sense to hard code programming language detection. The problem is that it's not easy to find technical, community, or organizational attributes in software products related to things like public health, or criminal justice reform, or food security, or really any topic or thematic area related to human development or poverty reduction. That's because social sector frameworks or thematic areas are not hard-coded into the platform. In fact, when I worked there, identifying common social sector patterns and behavior patterns on GitHub was one machine learning project I attempted in the hopes that I could get something on the GitHub product roadmap to change that. And I won't go into detail about my attempt to get that project off the ground, and instead just summarize by saying that technically it was prohibitively challenging and expensive to do it on a platform as old and mature as GitHub. Instead, my team had to resort to creating assets and resources on individual repos. That was basically like the difference between using Microsoft Word to create a template to manually evaluate if your work aligns with the sustainable development goals versus adding a button to the actual interface of Microsoft Word to detect SDG alignment. The manual option means you have to educate and convince individual users to use your template, whereas a hard-coded feature is automatically available for every Word user and every Word document. So the reach and the utility is vastly different. Now, as is the case with any major shift in funding, new AI and ML startups and new products from older tech companies have a chance to course correct by incorporating social good frameworks like the SDGs directly into their products at their product inception. Personally, I'm a big proponent of this idea, although there are notable tensions in doing so, namely appropriateness and timeliness. First, while some frameworks have wide social sector adoption, the ideals espoused are not universally agreed upon. I recently attended a tech salon hosted by my friend and longtime colleague Linda Raftree about applying feminist frameworks to AI. One participant mentioned incorporating the principles on the Convention on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, or CEDAW, in its model and content governance. While that's an interesting idea, another participant pointed out that CEDAW was created in 1979 and looked at gender as a binary, men and women. However, third or multiple generations have been widely accepted in centuries in some cultures and more recently in progressive areas of North America and Europe, whereas other parts of the world still only view gender as a binary. Even still, gender equality and gender equity are not universally agreed upon concepts among and within countries, religions, tribes, castes, or really any other demographic. A second tension with social good frameworks is for whom and how they were designed. The SDGs, for example, were originally meant for low and middle income countries applied at the national level. No doubt, as income inequality rises in some high income countries, some SDGs may be relevant, but some, if not most, targets were already achieved in high income countries before the goals were even established, so it may not make sense to track those indicators. The SDGs are also set to expire in 2030, and they were formed in 2012, which some of you might appreciate was the same year as when Oracle Cloud was introduced. Tech has obviously changed a lot since the SDGs were conceptualized, and there's therefore a real trade-off in hard-coding potentially outdated frameworks and current foundational technologies that may see us through the next several decades. Lastly, introducing social sector frameworks or ideologies in AI and ML is hard, like really hard. In this video, Tarunima Prabhakar, who's the co-founder of the civic tech organization Tattle, spoke about the organization's work to annotate an ML training dataset in 3 languages to flag abusive behavior from a feminist perspective. As Tarunima said, it was labor-intensive, sometimes hard to find consensus, and they had to deviate from common ML annotation protocols, which in itself took time to develop. Now, of course, that doesn't mean I don't think this work should be done, and in fact, there are already attempts to map out AI for social good projects. McKinsey recently tried to do this for what they called social good domains, but to adopt social sector frameworks directly into products, platforms, training data, and models across multiple industries in a timely, relevant, quantifiable, and internationally standardized way, there will need to be real and significant investments. In my opinion, one of the most controversial and difficult questions in tech for social good is the inclusion or exclusion of marginalized or minority populations in data collection and software products and platforms. Through previous talks and papers, I've talked about different schools of thought in data collection, the risk of categorization, and the potential harms of the mosaic effect, especially when it comes to LGBTQI populations. Now for this video, I'm again going to focus on LGBTQI populations, but through a personal example. So as I mentioned earlier, I've been hard at work on several projects, notably my second novel titled What It Meant to Survive, which is coming out in October 2024. If you want to learn more, go to malakumar.com/writing and then click on the What It Meant to Survive section. You can also sign up for updates. So to understand this example, it's necessary to know some of my personal background. For those of you who don't know, my first novel was titled The Past the Marriage and came out in 2014. It follows 3 generations of Indian and Indian American women, the last of whom, like me, is gay. Now, I'm extremely proud of the international recognition The Past the Marriage got, though the journey to promote the book proved to be extremely personally taxing. Just a month after The Path to Marriage came out, I made the very, very difficult decision to publicly come out in an op-ed that was published in The Advocate. I quit my job with the UN in Central Africa and came back here to New York City to fully embrace my life as a publicly gay author, which I thought, and I still think, was necessary to speak about the past of marriage in a genuine and unencumbered way. Now, as part of that public push to sell my book, my brother created a Wikipedia page about me, and there were a few other contributing authors after. While the public recognition was great, it unfortunately came with several violent online threats. In fact, when people ask me why it took me so long to write a second book, this is honestly one of the main reasons, the violent threats. In 2017, I was back working in tech for international development, and on a work trip to West Africa, I met my now wife, who's from a country that criminalizes homosexuality. And I spent a lot of time with her in her country that year, and because I had already dealt with violent threats, I had to then make yet another very difficult decision to permanently delete my Wikipedia page. Now, you might think that's pointless because I had so many other publicly available interviews and talks about my identity as a queer author. The reason I chose to get rid of specifically the Wikipedia page is because Wikipedia is excellent at the art of search engine optimization. So if someone searched for my name online, that article would definitely appear at the top of their results, and either the current text or the article version history, they could figure out my orientation, which might have put us in danger. Now that my second book is coming out next year, I'm back on the literary public speaking circuit. The existential threat of AI to writers is palpable, which is especially acute for those of us who are of a marginalized or minority identity. As a technologist and a queer Indian American novelist, I can say that I as an individual and I as a part of a larger community am scared of being both included or excluded in LLMs. And a huge part of my indecision is a lack of clarity in the downstream effects of inclusion. So there are multiple ways to be included in the output of a generative AI tool, whether it's text, images, audio, or video. As this video explained, an LLM itself could be customized, a prompt wrapper could be added, or some kind of database could be linked. The possibilities are rapidly changing, making it extremely hard to understand how our personal content or our personal information as writers could be used. On top of the hundreds of hours it took me to write, edit, and market my book and land a publishing deal, it took me even longer in the years after to cultivate my public voice as a gay Indian American writer and balance my career. There's been a ton of hidden labor, deep thought, and exploration that has gone into me becoming the writer and speaker I am. But despite that massive amount of unpaid labor, let's say hypothetically speaking, I give my consent for my writings and thought leadership as a queer Indian American author to be included in a large language model training dataset or in a prompt wrapper. Now done well, a Gen AI tool built on top of that model may allow a user to generate material very quickly that reads, looks, or sounds like mine, but is not actually mine. A judge here in the United States recently ruled that machine-generated content cannot be copyrighted. But even if that company that built the Gen AI application doesn't own the generated material, there's a real possibility that my writing and thought leadership ultimately benefits the company. For example, if they have a paywall for users to access the application. So at least some of the profit I could derive from my work would be diverted to that company. Second, there are real risks of hallucination, basically a Gen AI tool making up things. There's also a risk of Gen AI outputs not having the correct sentiment attached. While I would deliver complex stories and thoughts in an appropriate and nuanced tone, as the same video explains, LLMs don't have a source of truth unless you give it many examples and the external databases or resources needed to know what is true. So there's a real risk of a Gen AI application generating inaccurate or inappropriate material about being a queer Indian American writer that to an untrained eye seems legit. Left unchecked, these Gen AI applications could produce a story or a video or an audio segment that sounds like I wrote it but contradicts actual facts or my experience. Now, those are two downsides of me as an individual being included in an AI training model. Of course, the choice to exclude my writing and thought leadership is not that straightforward since ultimately I'm trying to get exposure for my novels. ChatGPT alone has 100 million plus users and counting and will play an increasingly more important role in online discoverability. To experiment, I went to ChatGPT to see if I as an author was included in the training model. As of when I recorded this video, the freely available model is GPT 3.5, whose training data stopped in 2021 and runs in a browser but does not browse the web. When I prompted this model to tell me about queer Indian American novelists, a fairly specific category, I got several results that included non-Indians, non-queer people, and non-novelists. Meanwhile, I don't appear, even after asking about queer Indian American novelists who worked at the United Nations, which is an even more specific category that I spoke and wrote about publicly many times. And one of the biggest training data sets for GPT models is Wikipedia. Not surprisingly, most of the authors that appear in this prompt response have Wikipedia pages. While I can't be 100% certain, I'm taking an educated guess that if I kept my Wikipedia page up all those years ago, which clearly stated I'm a queer Indian American novelist, I would be included in this ChatGPT response. So at the individual level, as a writer with quite a few safety and professional factors to navigate, the tension is real about what I want to be included in LLM training models. At the community or societal level, things could become even more nebulous. Being in my late 30s and having grown up in a conservative part of the United States, I can tell you how difficult it was to find resources or people who shared my intersectional identity. In fact, this is something we spoke about in a literary festival I recently participated in. The advent of Web 2.0 was powerful because in my late teens and early 20s, suddenly a world of writers and creators and artists who shared my identity as a queer Indian American came online and we could find each other. Inclusion and discoverability of the modern web were beautiful things. While the GPT-4 model can now browse the internet, how LLMs, prompt wrappers, and the web interact is constantly changing. One trend that is emerging, however, is that large companies, some academic institutions, and even some governments are customizing LLMs and building wrappers, tools, and applications on top for their staff or consultants to use across the company or institution. Now, this makes sense because it can help standardize outputs, help people find internal policies. It can even help people navigate what's already been created. Let's go back to that same ChatGPT example. Say an academic institution or a company that teaches writing takes a chatbot built on top of GPT 3.5 and a prompt wrapper that links to a more comprehensive database of Chinese American queer novelists. If a student or employee were to use the chatbot to search for queer Asian American authors, which of course is a broader category, or information about queer Asian American writing experiences, they would probably get a result that underrepresents non-Chinese American authors, like Indian American queer authors. If the student or employee isn't aware of the AI training model limitations, they probably wouldn't think to also do a manual search online. If that chatbot gains popularity and surpasses or even bypasses internet search engines among publishing companies, we queer Indian novelists may become less discoverable not only in the publishing industry, but to each other. So many aspects of this one example is true for many marginalized or minority identities, languages, or demographics. At the individual level, being included in LLMs could mean accessing much broader, wider audiences that benefit us as individuals, but it could also mean a real risk of cannibalizing personal gain, exposing information we don't want surfaced, or having our work contribute to incorrect, inaccurate, or inappropriate generated text, images, video, audio, or other media forms. At the societal or community level, exclusion means a real risk of not being represented in foundational models, tools, or technologies in the coming decades. But inclusion can mean sacrificing autonomy over our experiences or cultures. So as I said, the tension is real. Lastly, I want to briefly cover the interdisciplinary nature of human development. Now, I went to grad school for international affairs at the New School here in New York City, and at the time there were two capstone options to graduate. You could complete a practicum or you could write a thesis. Those of us who decided to write a thesis had to take a thesis workshop where we basically sat in a roundtable discussion and, in a constructive way, we poked holes at each other's work. One of my classmates took an idea that was very popular at the time, smart cities, and basically proposed a thesis around a hypothetical. What if a government in a low-income country made a full investment required to achieve 100% safe drinking water access for a select group of residents? The idea was that the government would focus their budgets on water access for those residents before moving on to other critical needs of the residents. When it comes to building software products or programs, I am a huge proponent of prioritization. In fact, my website is riddled with prioritization examples. But one thing that anyone who has real-world experience in any kind of human development or poverty reduction initiatives can tell you is that it's very hard to prioritize one need over the other. In fact, in international development, there's the concept called clusters, whereby things like water, sanitation, and hygiene are funded and addressed together because they are so deeply interrelated. That's exactly the point I had to make to my classmate. It's probably not realistic to separate access to safe, clean drinking water without addressing sanitation systems or hygiene education in parallel. Even if you could, how would a government prevent the movement of residents once the word got out that a particular community would get such heavy investments? What would prevent others from moving in and creating an acute spike in population density? Alas, this is one of the limitations of current AI and ML capabilities. While there are many incredible examples of using AI and ML to do things like spot tumors in someone's lungs, or improve logistics operations for food aid distribution, or map out areas that are most vulnerable to flooding, it's extremely hard to address the interdisciplinary nature of human development and poverty reduction. That's why it's still much more realistic to build an AI or ML solution for a narrow medical diagnosis than it is to prevent a public health disaster like a disease outbreak, because the latter involves so many more unknowns and variables. So there's a huge discourse that's way beyond the scope of this video and honestly beyond my own technical knowledge about how artificial narrow intelligence and artificial general intelligence will play out, so I won't get into that debate. However, I am curious to see if AGI development in the coming years may be able to address these more complex interdisciplinary challenges in human development and poverty reduction in new and novel ways. Alright, well that's it for me. As in my last video, I want to again call out that there are several incredible women of color who have been researching and publishing about ethical, responsible, and for good topics in AI for decades. This Goodreads list is a great place to find their publications. Thanks for listening, and if you like what you heard, please subscribe to my channel for more videos about tech for social good. And of course, feel free to reach out to me on my website or on LinkedIn if you want to chat about these topics. Bye.